Okay, so welcome to the second half of the algebra section of this book or chapter or lecture, or whatever we're going to call it. And here we're going to look at building on some of the tools we've just learned and actually learning something a little bit more complicated in algebra. So what we're going to look at is the expansion of two brackets. So what does this mean? Well, sometimes we actually have an expression which is in two brackets, or we can multiply that back out to give us a full expression. We might want it in the brackets in some cases because this helps us solve some problems. We will discuss this in a little bit more detail as we get into the future lectures. Anyway, let's just crack on with an example. So maybe we have something that looks a little bit like this. And we're going to have x minus 3. Okay, so we need now to bring back our old trusted friend, BODMAS. Okay, so what can we see from BODMAS? Well, we've got some brackets, yes, but we can't do anything inside those. We've got some no orders, okay, no division, but we've got some multiplications. So we now need to multiply these two brackets out. And the way I remember this is by saying out, 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 in, out, in. Okay, a little bit of binary there. Just a quick way of remembering a function. You don't have to do it that way. There are other ways. So let's see what I mean by this. So we can now multiply out each of these terms. So we would say out times by out. So that would be 3 times by 2x, which would be 6x. We see we have a negative here, which means that's negative 6x. We could then say we want to go out in, which is 2x multiplied by x. There's no negative terms, so that would be plus 2x squared. But then we're going to go in, out. So this is our inner term and our outer term. So that's 4 times by minus 3, which is 12. We have a negative and a positive, so that means it's negative. And finally, we have our two inner terms, which is 4 and x. So that would be positive 4x. So we can just neaten this up a little bit and we get something that says, okay, our result is 2x squared. So minus 6 plus 4x, minus 6x plus 4x is minus 2x. And then we also have the final term, which is our 12, and we can say that's minus 12. And that is our answer. Okay, so what happens now if we have something a little bit more different? What happens if we have something that looks a little bit like this? 2x plus 3 squared. Right, okay, so we'll bring back BODMAS again. But now we have some brackets, can't do anything in it, but now we have an order. Okay, so what can we do here? Well, we know that's not a division, but we know it's a multiplication. So actually this, we can rewrite it as 2x plus 3, 2x plus 3. And then we bring back our trusted help in here, which is out, 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 in, out, in. Okay, so we can say, multiplying the outer sides, we have 2x multiplied by 3, 2x multiplied by 3, which is 6x. We then have out in, so we have 2x multiplied by 2x, so that would be plus, because it's two positives, 4x squared. We then have in out, so a 3 multiplied by 3, it's a positive because we have two positive terms. And then finally we have our in, which will be 3 multiplied by 2x, which equals a positive 6x. Now if we like all these terms up and arrange a little bit, we can see that 4x squared, we've got here as our biggest term. So we have 6 plus 6, which is plus 12x. And then finally we have plus 9. And that is the answer to our problem. Okay, so this is great. We've shown how to get from an expression in brackets to an expression an expression like this quadratic expression. However, sometimes we don't want that. We actually want to go the opposite way. And as we move on to the next lecture, we'll explain really why we do want to go the opposite way. And as we find, actually, it is quite simple to go back and forth between the two. We'll also, in a few lectures' time, look at how we can derive a rule which is going to help us work on this if it's a really tricky problem. So anyway, let's start with a simple example. So say, for example, we get asked to factorize this problem. X squared minus 5x plus 6. Okay, right, so this is a quadratic and we want to be able to solve it. So what do? Well, we need to start to think how we can actually look at our previous, or how we can get this into some brackets. And as we can see previously, well, if we have two x terms, the x terms are multiplied by each other to make the number of the x, the biggest x squared term. So what we can think of, well, if we open up some brackets here, we'll make some big ones. We know that, well, x something is going to be multiplied by x something. So because it's in terms of x, we know it must be x and x. Okay. We can also see that there's a positive and a negative sign. So that means that it's not possible for there to be a positive and negative actually in the calculation, because everything would be negative then. Therefore, because we have a positive and a negative, it must mean that both terms are negative. The next thing we need to see is, okay, we've got a 5x and a 6. So if we go back to see how we actually got this x term, you see we actually got two x terms by addition of these two, this x times plus 3. So what we can say is, right, so we need something when multiplied, it can equal 6, and when added, it can equal 5. So all we can get from these two is we can say, well, actually, minus 2 plus minus 3 has to equal 5. So that's one way of doing it. And also minus 2 multiplied by minus 3 is it got to equal 6. Therefore, our answer has to be minus 2 and minus 3. Okay, so we can just check this as well. So we bring back our previous rule, which is out, 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 in, out, in. Okay, so we take these brackets. This is what we've just made, and we're going to reapply it. So we're going to say out, out. So minus 3x, out, in, x squared plus x squared. And then we're going to say in, out, minus 2 times by minus 3. Well, we already know we've just worked out is positive 6. And then we're going to say that that would be in, which is minus 2x. So if we begin to tidy this all up, we will see that that is x squared minus 5x plus 6. So we have the same answer as what we got here. So this is what we have now factorized this quadratic function to equal two brackets. You might be sat there thinking, why the hell are we doing this? It makes absolutely no sense why we're doing it. It will all become clear. It'll all become clear in the next lecture. But here, as I say, we're just building the tool sets to then move it into the next lecture. Okay, so let's have another look at another problem. Maybe one like this, where we've been set factorize x squared minus 3x minus 10. Okay, so a little bit more complicated this. We have to note that we've got two negative terms here this time. So we can note that now we actually, again, as in the previous problem, we'll put two big brackets here, that we actually have x squared again. So that means that x has to be in both sides. Okay, so the second thing we can note is both the signs are negative. So that would mean we couldn't have two negatives again as we had previously. because we have to have a negative multiplied by a negative at one point, which would be a positive, as we saw we needed previously. We can't have two positives because that really doesn't make sense because we don't have our negative there in. Therefore, we must have a positive and a negative. Okay, so we now need to find two numbers which, when multiplied together, make 10, and when subtracted, make 3. So what have we got for these? So multiplied together to make 10. Okay, so what have we got? The factors of 10. Well, there's only 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. And when subtracted, they must make 3. Well, 2 and 5 would fit that quite well. Therefore, we can say that this would be positive 2 minus 5, and we get the answer of 2 and 5. And if we just check that again, as we did previously, we bring back our little helpful out, 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 in, out, in. We can say that we get out, out would be minus 5x. Okay. In, out, in, we have x squared, so plus x squared. Then we'd have out, in. In, out, we have minus 2 times by minus 10. Minus 5 is minus 10. That's it. And then we have in, which is plus 2x. So plus 2x. And if we begin to sum this up, we'd say we have x squared. So minus 5x plus 2x is negative 3x. And finally, we have our last 10 at the end, which is negative 10. So we can see we have the same answer as what we previously had. We've got this correct. Okay, and then finally, let's think if we can make this a little bit more difficult. So what happens if we have a question that asks us, what about factorizing 12 minus x minus 6x squared? So this isn't the form we're used to. It's actually a little bit more complicated. It's not in the form. So again, we can see that the x term is negative and it's preceded by a 6. Okay. So this means that one of the x terms must be negative and must be either 6x or must be in terms of 6x, which means it's got to be a multiple of it. So it's actually going to be 6x and x, or 3x and 2x. Okay, so we could maybe write that down. So it's actually either going to be these two. So we have to say in the brackets, we might have two guesses where it could be either of these. It could either be 6x and 1 and x, or it could be 3x and 2x. And we don't know whether it's going to be positive or negative. Second, we can note that the sum of the x terms must equal 1 because we want to get back to this x. Okay, so and the number of the terms could be either the numbers of the terms could be actually 12 or 3 and 4 because we want to get to 12 here as well. So they can't equal 6 and 2 because the quadratic is odd. So therefore, we can think of what we've got here. So we can't have this. We've got to have something in terms of 3x and 2x. We need a 3 and a 4 to get to the 12. So we would have, it would be a 2x would go, 2x would have to go with the 3 plus 3, and we'd have to have a 4 in here as well. So we have a 4 because it's 4 times 3. So now we need to get the signs right to be able to get to negative 6. So what we can see is, well, that would have to be, we need to get a 0 here. So this needs to be a negative. So if we rewrite this, we can say our answer would be 4 minus 3x, close brackets, open brackets, 3 plus 2x. And this would give us our answer. So we can check this if we bring back our handy rule. So out, 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 in, out, in. If we check this, we can say that out, out would be 8x. And we want to say that out, in would be plus 12. In out would be negative 3 multiplied by 2x, which would be negative 6x squared. And in would be minus 3 multiplied by 3, which would be negative 9x. So if we then neaten this up, we can work it out that we have negative 6x squared. So minus x, because we have an 8x minus 9x, as we see here. And then we have our plus 12. And then if we look at the previous form up here, we can see we can rewrite this as 12 minus x minus 6x squared. And this will give us the form in which we previously had. Okay, so that's a little bit tricky. It's not easy. We will go back onto this in a couple of lectures' time. We're going to discuss how we can do this, how we can actually derive a formula which is going to help us to finally get to that answer. And we'll leave it at here for the simplification of brackets. And then the next part, we're going to look at some fractions and how we bring these in to our algebraic functions.